he tried to lasso a royal guard. What happened next shocked everyone. A cowboy, a royal guard, and a rope. Sounds like the start of a joke, right? But what happened in front of Windsor Hall that day was anything but comedy. Billy Ray Carter, 52 years old, straight out of Texas, stepped into a world of tradition with a swagger, a smirk, and a lasso. He thought it was just a game. The crowd thought it was hilarious. But the moment his rope touched the royal guard's hat, everything changed. Stillness turned into tension. Silence became a warning. And with just 7 words, the guard delivered a message that hit harder than any fall. What began as a stunt ended as a lesson in respect, restraint, and the quiet power of standing your ground. This isn't just a story. It's a moment you'll feel long after the video ends. The afternoon sun poured golden light over the cobblestone square of Windsor Hall, casting long, dramatic shadows from the towering iron gates and the guards who stood before them, unmoving, unreadable, legendary. Their crimson tunics glowed against the stone, their black bearskin hats rising like monuments of tradition. Each stood like a silent sentinel, as if carved from marble, embodying centuries of discipline and duty. Tourists bustled about with phones raised and cameras clicking, their voices blending into a low hum of accents from all around the world. Laughter floated through the air, mingling with the rhythmic echoes of footsteps and the distant murmur of a street performer's violin. It was the kind of scene you'd expect from a travel documentary, regal, orderly, and just a little too perfect to be real. And then, as if summoned by the universe to stir this postcard into chaos, he appeared. Billy Ray Carter. 52 years old, 6 feet tall, boots scuffed from rodeos past, and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat that had clearly seen too many Texas summers. His jacket was stitched in sunset colors, burnt orange and desert gold, and over his shoulder swung a coiled lasso, thick and worn. He looked less like a tourist and more like a misplaced sheriff from a 1980s Western, dropped into Royal England like a plot twist no one saw coming. Heads turned. Conversations paused. A few phones lowered. There was something about him, his swagger, maybe, or the way he stood with one hand resting casually on his hip, as if surveying a landscape instead of a palace courtyard. Even the pigeons seemed to pause mid-step. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice loud and proud with a thick southern drawl, "y'all are about to witness a little Texas hospitality right here in Her Majesty's front yard." A few tourists laughed, unsure whether this was a performance, a prank, or simply a man who had confused Buckingham for a backyard barbecue. But Billy didn't care. This wasn't just sightseeing. This was a stage, and in his mind, he was the main character. The guard nearest to him, rigid, stoic, untouched by the theatrics, didn't flinch. Not a blink, not a breath, just stone-still silence, like the entire British Empire was watching through his eyes. But Billy had no intention of stopping there. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached into his satchel and pulled out the rope. He held it high in the air like Excalibur, spinning it once, then again as the sun caught its arc. The crowd leaned in. A murmur of curiosity swept the square. Some were amused. Others confused, a few horrified. Billy just smiled. Because for him, Windsor wasn't a castle. It was a rodeo ring, and the opening act was just getting started. And just like that, the square was no longer a place of quiet admiration. It had become a stage. Billy Ray Carter, still holding that coiled rope with the reverence of a showman, stepped forward. His boots struck the stone with purpose. Thud, 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 as if every step was part of a choreography only he could hear. The crowd, unsure whether to laugh or call security, watched with the kind of nervous anticipation reserved for street performers who balance swords or swallow fire. But Billy wasn't juggling or breathing flames. He was about to do something far bolder. Lasso a royal guard. "Y'all ever seen a cowboy wrangle one of them fancy fellas before?" he called out, grinning as he began to spin the rope above his head. The lasso circled smoothly, slicing through the late afternoon air like a desert breeze through dry grass. It wasn't just a show, it was a challenge, a collision of cultures unfolding before their very eyes. The guard, dressed in full ceremonial uniform, remained perfectly still. Not a twitch, not even a blink beneath that towering 18-inch bearskin hat. The discipline was uncanny, almost inhuman. He could have been a statue if not for the faint rise and fall of his breath. Billy locked eyes with him, or at least tried to. It was hard to tell beneath the brim and the shadows. "This here's a real Texas trick," Billy said with a wink to a nearby couple, "and I ain't missed since '98. With a theatrical flourish, he let the rope fly. It soared and landed squarely at the guard's polished black boots. The crowd burst into laughter. A few clapped, others groaned, but all eyes stayed locked on the unfolding absurdity. "Well, shoot," Billy muttered, tugging the rope back in like a fisherman reeling a catch he didn't want to keep. "Guess that one was just a warm-up round." But something had changed. The guard, unmoved physically, now stood as the absolute embodiment of restraint. And in that stillness, there was tension. Not the kind that snaps, the kind that waits. Billy, emboldened by the laughter, readjusted his hat, gave the rope another twirl, and whispered dramatically to the crowd, "This time, it's personal." He launched it again, this time with more force, more conviction, more Texas. The loop caught, sort of. Not the man, but the end of the guard's ceremonial rifle. A gentle snag, but enough to cause a ripple in the square. Phones lifted higher, gasps mingled with stifled laughs. This was no longer just playful mischief, it was inching toward disrespect. Billy, unaware or perhaps unwilling to care, raised both hands in victory. "Yeehaw! Gotcha, partner!" But just as he tightened the rope with a tug, physics delivered its verdict. Billy stumbled back, boots scraping against uneven cobblestones, until gravity finished the punchline. He landed hard. Hat airborne, pride wounded. And all the while, the guard didn't move. Not yet. For a long, breathless moment, everything stood still. Everything except Billy Ray Carter, now sprawled across the cobblestones like a toppled scarecrow in Sunday boots. His cowboy hat, launched mid-fall, spun through the air like a paper lantern caught in a gust. It drifted, almost poetically, before coming to rest at the one place it probably shouldn't have, right at the polished toes of the king's guard. The crowd lost it. Laughter rippled through the square like thunder through a canyon. Some tourists clutched their sides. Others raised their phones higher to capture what had now become the most unexpected comedy show in Britain that day. Billy groaned and pushed himself up, brushing the dust off his jacket with a sheepish grin. "Well, that didn't go quite as planned," he muttered to no one in particular, but the show, in his mind, was far from over. And then something so subtle happened, it was almost mythic. The guard, still as granite, cold as law, moved, barely. With one precise motion, he slid the toe of his boot forward. It tapped the edge of Billy's hat just enough to send it rolling. And roll it did, right off the stone path across the square and straight into the icy basin of the courtyard fountain. The collective gasp was immediate, followed by another burst of delighted laughter. The timing was too perfect, too poetic. It was like watching a chess master make a single devastating move. Billy blinked. Did he just kick my hat into the water? There was no answer, only the echo of splashes as he scrambled toward the fountain, leaping in without hesitation. His boots met the shallow water with a squelch that would haunt leather for weeks. In seconds, his jeans were soaked to the knee, his pride dampened further by the freezing temperature. But even dripping wet and clearly flustered, Billy couldn't let the moment die. He retrieved the soggy hat, wrung it out like a dish rag, and raised it high like it was a trophy. "Ain't over yet, folks," he declared, shivering. Some clapped, some cringed, and one kid near the front whispered, "Mom, is he allowed to do that?" The mother, caught between laughter and second-hand embarrassment, simply shrugged. Billy, now fully in entertainer mode, reached into his satchel again, this time pulling out a tiny American flag, the kind you'd find at a 4th of July parade. He waved it with dramatic flair, marching back toward the guard like a half-soaked revolutionary. "Bet you can't stay serious with a little freedom in your face," he called out, planting himself just inches from the unmoved soldier. The guard didn't blink, didn't shift. He was carved from something older than stone. But then, just then, Billy froze. Had he seen it? A twitch, a flicker, a shadow of a smirk. He pointed dramatically. "Y'all saw that! He moved!" "I got him!" And just like that, the crowd exploded again. Billy thought he was winning, but the guard, he hadn't even begun to play. And just like that, the square transformed again, from laughter to tension, from comedy to confrontation. Billy Ray Carter, soaked to the bone and half convinced he'd cracked the Queen's finest, stood tall with his tiny American flag, eyes locked on the immovable sentinel before him. But what Billy didn't realize, what the crowd was beginning to sense, was that a line had just been crossed. Up until now, it had all been fun and games. A cowboy out of place, a royal guard playing statue, tourists entertained by the odd clash of cultures. But intent has weight, and repetition sharpens its edge. And as Billy raised his rope for one more Texas trick, that edge became visible. He spun it once, twice, faster this time. His shoulders tensed, his eyes narrowed. "Come on, partner," he muttered. "Let's see if you flinch this time." Then he launched. The loop sailed through the air, cutting clean across the blue sky, and this time it caught. Not the boots. Not the rifle. The hat. The towering bearskin hat, symbol of honor and heritage, tipped slightly as the lasso tightened around its edge. The crowd gasped in unison, a collective intake of breath that sucked the warmth out of the afternoon. And then it happened. The guard moved. One step, deliberate, controlled. Deadly quiet. But it was enough. Billy flinched first. His boots lost grip on the slick cobblestones, and he stumbled backward, tangled in his own rope, landing hard for the second time that day. His legs shot out, arms flailed, and the flag he once held high now flopped into a puddle at his side. The square held its breath. Then, for the first time since it all began, the guard broke the silence. He took one small step forward, leaned down, just enough for his voice to carry, and said in a low, clear tone, "Sir, please respect the King's Guard." 7 words, spoken not with anger, not with arrogance, but with the weight of centuries behind them. A voice carved from discipline, refined by tradition, hardened by duty, and it struck Billy harder than any fall ever could. He stared at the guard, wide-eyed, like he'd seen a ghost. "He talks!" he gasped, as if the marble statue had suddenly grown lungs. But the crowd, they didn't gasp, they roared. To them, it was all part of the show. Another twist in the tale, another punchline to a performance. They didn't hear the line being drawn. But Billy did. Because in that one moment, the laughter no longer felt like applause. It felt like warning bells. Still, pride is a stubborn thing. Billy stood again, slower this time, brushing himself off. His hands trembled slightly. His voice cracked. But he still forced a grin. "I ain't done yet," he whispered, though no one asked him to continue. The rope was back in his hand. But this time it wasn't just a trick. It was a test. And the King's Guard, he had already passed his... There was a shift in the air, so slight, yet unmistakable. The kind that comes right after thunder and just before the storm ends. Billy Ray Carter, rope in hand and pride running thin, stood in the middle of the square like a man who had finally heard what the silence was trying to say. The guard had spoken. The boundary was clear, but ego rarely backs down gracefully. Billy looked at the rope, then at the crowd, now a mixture of amused tourists and skeptical stares. The laughter had softened, replaced by curiosity, and a quiet question hanging in the air. Would he finally stop? But Billy wasn't ready. Not just yet. With one last flash of theatrical defiance, he reached into his satchel and pulled out something no one expected, a shiny plastic sheriff's badge, no bigger than a bottle cap, glittering in the sunlight like a joke too proud of itself. He slapped it onto his wet jacket and declared, with the wavering voice of a man still trying to command attention, "All right, folks, I'm deputizing myself. If I can't make him laugh, I'll make him blink." It would have been funny if it hadn't been so desperate. He struck a pose, legs wide, chest puffed, arms akimbo, as if waiting for the world to give him a final round of applause. But before he could say another word, something unexpected cut him off. A loud snort. From the guard's horse. Standing just feet away, the majestic creature had been silent the whole time, calm, composed, almost indifferent. But now it flicked its head with regal boredom, then whipped its tail in one smooth arc, and sent a wet spray of water and foam directly onto Billy's hat. The timing was cosmic. The laughter returned, full force this time. Tourists doubled over. Cameras shook in people's hands. Even the pigeons seemed to scatter in approval. Billy froze, hat dripping again, dignity now soaked beyond repair. He looked at the horse, then the crowd, then back to the guard, still unmoving, still unreadable. And yet, something was different. A few people near the front swore they saw it, a smirk, fleeting, almost imperceptible, gone in a blink. But for those who caught it, it was like spotting a shooting star in broad daylight, a reward not for persistence, but for the sheer absurdity of it all. Billy sighed, defeated and smiling, the kind of smile a man wears when he knows he's been outplayed by silence itself. As he turned to leave, sloshing across the stones with his ruined hat in hand, a small voice called out, "Hey, mister!" A boy, maybe 7, held out a tiny souvenir flag. "For you." Billy paused, took the flag gently, nodded once, then tipped what was left of his hat. And just like that, the show was over. The guard returned to stillness. The crowd began to disperse. The square, once a theater of chaos, slipped quietly back into order. And somewhere between laughter and silence, a little bit of respect was finally understood. The crowd began to drift, like waves after a storm. Laughter faded into murmurs, footsteps returned to rhythm, and the square slowly remembered what it was supposed to be, a place of history, reverence, and order. But Billy Ray Carter still stood there, flag in one hand, tattered hat in the other, soaked and humbled, yet somehow lighter. His boots squelched as he turned away from the guard, not in defeat, but in something quieter, something closer to understanding. He didn't speak, didn't wave, didn't try one last stunt. Instead, he let the silence speak, for once. And then, from the edge of the crowd, came a voice that didn't mock, didn't cheer, just reached out. "Sir," the little boy said again, tugging gently at Billy's sleeve, "you were really funny." "But I think he won." Billy looked down, surprised, not by the words, but by the honesty behind them. There was no malice, just a child's unfiltered truth. He knelt slowly, knees cracking, and looked the boy in the eyes. "Yeah," he said with a lopsided smile. "I think you're right." The boy held out the tiny flag again, this time more solemnly. "This is for trying." Billy took it like it was a medal, a hard-earned one. He tucked it gently into the band of his soaked hat, then rose to his feet and gave the boy a wink. "Much obliged, deputy." Behind him, the guard adjusted his stance, just slightly, and returned to position. The sun glinted off the edge of his rifle, off the curve of the badge on his chest. He never looked Billy's way. He didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. Sometimes dignity doesn't raise its voice. Sometimes it doesn't move at all. Billy began his walk across the square, not limping, not slinking away, but moving with the slow, measured steps of a man who had come looking for attention and left with perspective. Each bootstep echoed in the quiet, a little heavier than before, but steadier somehow. The fountain gurgled softly behind him, pigeons returned to their pacing, and somewhere a tour guide resumed their speech as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something small, maybe. Something not easily filmed or captured or viral, but real. Because in the middle of that spectacle, in all the laughter, embarrassment, bravado, and spectacle, something deeply human had flickered, a lesson not spoken but felt. Not everything needs a punchline, not every guard needs to be cracked, and sometimes the strongest response is stillness. As Billy disappeared into the thinning crowd, one final thought lingered in the air, soft, unspoken but shared. Maybe respect isn't always given. Maybe it's earned. One stumble, one splash, one smirk at a time, and the guard. He never moved again, because he didn't have to. Long after Billy Ray Carter vanished into the ebb and flow of tourists, the square seemed quieter than before, not by volume, but by presence. Something invisible lingered in the space he left behind. Not the echo of laughter, not even the whisper of water still dripping from his boots. No, it was something heavier. Something more human, perspective. Because what had started as comedy, a cowboy with a lasso and a crowd hungry for spectacle, had become something else entirely. A lesson not just for Billy, but for everyone who watched. It's easy to mock what we don't understand. It's even easier to turn tradition into entertainment. But the deeper truth is this: tradition doesn't exist to amuse us. It exists to remind us of boundaries, of sacrifice, of discipline forged in silence and held even when the world taunts you to break. The King's Guard didn't need to fight back. He didn't need to shout or push or strike. His greatest strength was his stillness, and his sharpest weapon was restraint. And that restraint, held through provocation, ridicule, and rope tricks, said more than any outburst ever could. Billy thought he was testing the guard's patience, but in truth he was testing his own understanding of respect. And isn't that something we all do, consciously or not? We push limits, we test roles, we laugh at what stands still while we're moving too fast to think. But sometimes it takes a fall, public, wet, a little humiliating, for us to realize that not everything is meant to bend. Some things are meant to stand, like a soldier in uniform. Like a symbol older than our jokes, like dignity in the face of noise. As the sun began to dip behind the rooftops of Windsor, the shadow of the guard stretched longer across the stone. He hadn't moved again, not even once. Yet something about him had changed in the eyes of the crowd. He wasn't just a character anymore. He was a reminder that silence can be powerful, that duty isn't performative, that there are places in this world where reverence still matters, and maybe, just maybe, we need those places more than ever. The boy who gave Billy the flag held his father's hand now, looking up not at the cowboy, but at the man who never flinched. "Dad," he whispered, "I want to stand like that someday." The father didn't laugh. He just nodded. Because in that moment, they both understood. The story wasn't about the cowboy. It was about the guard. And the lesson wasn't in the rope, or the splash, or the stunt. It was in the pause. The kind of pause that makes you think long after the square empties, long after the flag dries, long after the cameras stop rolling. Now that you've walked with us through this unlikely encounter between a cowboy's pride and a soldier's silence, we'd love to hear from you. What would you have done in Billy Ray's boots? Do you see the guard's stillness as strength or cold indifference? And more importantly, where do you draw the line between playful freedom and respectful boundaries? Let us know in the comments below, not just what you think, but how this story made you feel. Did it make you laugh? Did it make you pause? Or did it leave you rethinking how we treat symbols, roles, and people who serve quietly? Tell us where you're watching from. Whether you're in Texas like Billy, or in Tokyo, Nairobi, Toronto, or a quiet town no one's ever heard of, we want to hear your voice. Your thoughts don't just live in the comment section. They become part of the story we're building together. So scroll down, take a moment, and leave a piece of your mind below. Because the real dialogue starts after the story ends.